With a voice as raw as rolling thunder, Brian Johnson shook the world with AC/DC's electrifying riffs. A man who turned rundown pubs into million-dollar stages. They call him the roar of rock, a voice powerful enough to make tens of thousands scream with just one line, "Back in Black." But behind that roar was a boy growing up in a cramped home in England, where music was a luxury drowned out by hunger and arguments. He was the man who nearly lost everything when his ears failed him, yet he rose again, leading AC/DC to the top and now living like a king with a fortune of over $100 million. This is the story of Brian Johnson, a rock and roll legend, where luxury and scars blend into an unforgettable symphony. If you've ever thought that celebrities were born with silver spoons in their mouths, Brian Johnson's story will make you rethink everything. Brian Francis Johnson was born on October 5, 1947, in the industrial slums of Dunston, Gateshead, England. It was 1950s Britain, where poverty hung heavier than the coal dust from the factories, and the scars of war had yet to heal. There were no stage lights there, only black smoke from chimneys, muddy alleyways, and dreams lost in the sound of morning train whistles. Brian's home was no picture-perfect haven. It was a cramped, crumbling apartment where the walls were so thin he could hear the neighbors' coughs, and the cold wind sliced through the cracks like a knife. His father was a military sergeant, hard as steel, strict, and mostly absent, leaving the family to struggle in his absence. His mother, a gentle Italian woman, was the rare warmth in their damp, dim home. She worked tirelessly, sewing, washing clothes for others, just to keep food on the table. But often, there wasn't enough. On bitter winter nights, Brian and his siblings curled under a tattered blanket, the stone floor beneath them still covered in frost. Once, he secretly picked up a few stray potatoes that had fallen from a delivery cart just to bring them home, just to see his mother smile despite the hunger. Meals were as simple as you could imagine: bland mashed potatoes, a dry piece of dark bread, tea without sugar. If they were lucky, a bit of lard to spread on top. But in that tiny, crowded kitchen, something magical always played. A crackling old radio, humming with classical music, American blues, and the soft Italian folk songs his mother sang while sewing by the flickering oil lamp. It was there that the first seeds of music were planted in Brian's heart. He once said, "I didn't know what music was, but I knew it made me forget the cold, the hunger, if only for a little while." But passion alone couldn't put food on the table. At 14, Brian dropped out of school and threw himself into any job he could find, washing cars in the rain, installing vinyl rooftops under the scorching heat, fixing pipes in the dead of winter, and assembling machines in a roaring factory. His hands were always calloused, his fingernails stained with engine oil, and his clothes carried the permanent scent of gasoline. "I'll never forget the smell of fuel on my clothes after work," he once said. But that smell taught me resilience. If you don't give up, you'll find a way out. Brian never went to university. He had no formal musical training. But he had something no school could teach: a raw, gravelly voice, packed with so much emotion it sounded like steel crashing against steel, as if every hardship of his life was compressed into each note. He started performing in rundown pubs, where the crowds were drunk. The music was often drowned out by shouting, and beer bottles smashed against the walls. Once, a drunk man hurled a bottle at him for singing too loudly. It hit Brian on the shoulder. But he didn't stop. He picked up the shattered glass, brushed off the dirt, and kept singing, as if it was the only way to keep his dream alive. His first band had a ridiculous name, the Gobi Desert Canoe Club. No one remembered it, and no one cared. His earliest stages were made of old wooden crates, his spotlights were flickering oil lamps, and his payment was sometimes just a warm pint of beer. But for Brian, every night on stage, no matter how small, was a step closer to something greater. He wasn't chasing fame. He was singing to survive, to scream into the void. I am still here. I still have a voice. Meanwhile, on the other side of England, a young Eric Clapton was playing his guitar until his fingers bled, using music as his only escape from the pain of abandonment. Two different men, two different lives, but the same fire burning inside, leading them to heights they never dared dream of. This was Brian Johnson in his early years. Not a star, not a legend, just a quiet symbol of resilience. A boy from Dunstan, with tattered shoes and a dream that refused to die. But Brian Johnson's life wasn't just about a childhood of poverty and a burning dream. There was a moment, just one moment, that changed everything, turning him from an ordinary mechanic into the lead singer of one of the greatest rock bands in history. What happened? And why did fate choose him? 1980, a fateful year for the history of rock, and for Brian Johnson's own life. By then, Brian was in his 30s. At an age when many give up and settle for an ordinary life, he was still chasing a music career that most considered past its time. Just a few years earlier, he had been standing in a factory, singing to drown out the roar of machines, his hands covered in grease, his dreams buried beneath layers of coal dust. With his band Geordie, he had seen glimpses of success, a few packed gigs, a handful of good reviews, but it all faded quickly, leaving him playing to half-empty bars, scraping by on meager pay, and clinging to the fragile hope that one day, someone would hear his voice. And then, fate called, but not in a beautiful way. Bon Scott, the legendary voice of AC/DC, had suddenly passed away after a night of heavy drinking, leaving behind an irreplaceable void. The band was in crisis. They faced the biggest question of their career: continue or end it all forever. For many, replacing Bon was impossible. But brothers Angus and Malcolm Young, the backbone of AC/DC, believed that music couldn't die with him. They began searching, and one unusual name made the list: Brian Johnson, an unknown singer from England. The audition felt like something out of a movie. Brian, both nervous and exhausted, stood in a room full of equipment, under the scrutinizing gaze of one of the biggest rock bands in the world. He had no stylist, no special arrangements. Just a flat cap, a voice like rolling thunder, and all his faith in what might be his last shot. On the way there, he had sat in his car, hands shaking, unable to believe he was about to walk through the door of his lifelong dream. He told himself, this isn't the end of poverty, it's the beginning of a dream. The moment he started singing, the room shook. As soon as the first note left his mouth, Angus Young glanced at the others and smiled. They had found the one to carry Bon's legacy. Brian couldn't believe it when he got the call. On his way home, he pulled over, stared into the rearview mirror, and asked himself, did I really just do that? Joy came with an immense burden, not just to replace a singer, but to step into the hearts of millions of grieving fans. Shortly after, AC/DC entered a recording studio in the Bahamas to work on their new album. The name they chose? Back in Black. a quiet tribute to Bon Scott. They had no idea they were about to write history. The recording process wasn't easy. The heat was unbearable, the equipment was limited, and emotions were raw. Brian later recalled nights where he sat alone on the porch, writing lyrics to the sound of crashing waves, living inside a dream but afraid to believe it was real. He thought, if I fail, I'll go back to Greece and dive bars. But he refused to let fear win. Then the album dropped, and everything exploded. Back in Black sold over 50 million copies, becoming the second best-selling album of all time, behind Thriller by Michael Jackson. Songs like You Shook Me All Night Long, Hell's Bells, and Shoot to Thrill instantly became rock anthems. The first time Brian stood on a massive stage with AC/DC, he was overwhelmed by the sight of thousands of fans screaming his name. From a grease-stained mechanic, he was now standing behind a microphone, singing loud enough to shake the world. From a nobody, Brian Johnson became the new soul of AC/DC. But unlike the dazzling Hollywood rise to fame, success came to him with an immense weight. His first live show with the band was at Wembley Stadium. Looking out at tens of thousands of fans, he thought, I made it. From Dunstan to here, I really made it. I never tried to be Bon Scott. I just tried to be worthy of the place he left behind, Brian later said in an interview. From that moment on, Brian wasn't just the guy who replaced Bon Scott. He became a symbol of rebirth, the new roar of AC/DC, carrying the old heart but breathing new life into it. From singing in factories to drown out the noise, he was now singing for the whole world to hear. From a boy who once slept on the floor in Dunstan, Brian Johnson became one of the greatest voices of all time. But have you ever wondered, how does a legend like him live when the stage lights go out? Brace yourself, because Brian's everyday life is grander than any concert you've ever seen. When the stage goes dark, Brian Johnson doesn't fade away. He steps into a world where luxury isn't just a style, it's a statement. His life is like an extravagant ballad, unique, dazzling, and beyond the mold of any rock star. A $10 million mansion in Sarasota, a sanctuary of nature and technology. Nestled in the most exclusive area of Sarasota, Florida, Brian Johnson's $10 million mansion isn't just a house, it's the ultimate lifestyle declaration. From a modest home he purchased in 1991 for under $700,000, he transformed it into an 8,000 square foot architectural masterpiece. Outside, an infinity pool stretches into the bay. Inside, it's a world of technology and artistry. A smart home system controlled entirely by voice, floor-to-ceiling glass walls opening to the ocean, cedarwood ceilings imported from Canada, and an underground cinema with acoustics designed by an Abbey Road Studios expert. Every corner reflects his personality. Most notably, a private underground recording studio holds not only vintage instruments but also his living inspiration. Rocker's Retreat in the Bahamas, a secret paradise for the chosen few. On a private island in the Bahamas, Brian owns a retreat that remains a mystery to most fans. It doesn't appear on Google Maps, and no press photos exist. Only a select few friends have ever set foot there. Called Rocker's Retreat, this hidden paradise sits beneath towering palm trees, boasting a 500-meter private beach and a personal yacht dock. Inside, it blends Caribbean coastal charm with cutting-edge tech, hurricane-proof tinted glass, hydro-massage beds, and a music room with a panoramic ocean view. Brian once joked, "This is where I escape the world, to remember who I am before the guitars call me back." Rolls-Royce Phantom, redefining silent luxury. In his vast Sarasota garage, Brian's 2007 Rolls-Royce Phantom stands as a symbol of his journey from poverty to glory. With a 6.75L V12 engine producing 453 horsepower, the car delivers an unmatched smoothness, luxurious silence, a stark contrast to his roaring voice on the AC/DC stage. When first released, the Phantom cost over $500,000. But for Brian, its real value lies in the story behind it. "I used to think Rolls-Royces were for royalty. Now I drive one like it's a part of me." He often cruises Sarasota's coastal roads, windows down, letting the sea breeze remind him of the tough days in Dunstan that he left behind. Ferrari F40, a speed machine for a wild soul. If the Rolls-Royce represents silence, the Ferrari F40 embodies unchained fire. With a 4.5L V8 engine pushing 570 horsepower, this supercar originally retailed for around $250,000 in 2010 but is now valued at over $1 million due to its rarity. Brian calls it the most beautiful beast I've ever owned on Cars That Rock. He loves how it roars like a rock anthem, accelerating from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just 3.4 seconds. When in London, he takes it for late-night drives, letting the engine's growl mix with memories of his early days singing in dingy pubs, proof that a rocker never forgets his roots. But what makes it truly special isn't just its price. It's the fact that Brian customized its sound system himself, installing a British-made amplifier. A rocker at heart, never letting an engine drown out his music. Lola T71 Malawian Kwacha, a $2.5 million racing legend. Brian isn't just a singer, he's a real racer, and his 1965 Lola T71 Malawian Kwacha is the ultimate proof. Only 15 were ever made, and he owns chassis number 15, a rare gem powered by a 5.7L Ford the 5.8 engine delivering 550 horsepower. Its current value? Over $2.5 million. But for Brian, it's never been about the price. It's about the thrill of driving it. He once raced it at the Rolex 24 Daytona and later told Classic Motorsports, "Sitting in this car, you feel like you're dancing on the edge of life and death, but the engine sings sweeter than any song." Stored at Predator Performance in Florida, the Lola is always race ready, waiting for Brian to relive his adrenaline-fueled days on the track. 1969 Dodge Charger General Lee, a childhood memory on wheels. Brian's fully restored 1969 Dodge Charger, a replica of General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard, is one of his most sentimental possessions. Painted in its signature bright orange, the car's restoration cost him around $200,000, a personal investment in nostalgia. He bought it as a way to reconnect with childhood memories of watching TV with his family in England. On weekends, he drives it around Sarasota, sounding the Dixie horn, a tribute to the rock generation that grew up with adventure and rebellion. "It's not just a car, it's a part of me," he said on Cars That Rock. 1928 Bentley 4.5-liter Vanden Plas, the legendary Thunder Guts. Among his collection, Brian's 1928 Bentley 4.5-liter Vanden Plas, nicknamed Thunder Guts, is a true classic. With a 4-cylinder engine producing 110 horsepower, this car was an icon of British racing in the 1920s. Its value today? Over $1.5 million. Brian drives it as part of his everyday life in Sarasota, appreciating its deep, rich engine sound and polished wood interior. On Cars That Rock, he once said, "This car embodies everything British, strong, enduring, and full of character." For him, it's a tribute to the homeland that nurtured his rock dream. A life where a rocker lives like a king, but keeps the soul of that Dunstan boy. Every piece of Brian's life is a reflection, not just of wealth, but of a man who once dreamed big and dared to live even bigger. He doesn't flaunt it, yet every time he appears, it leaves people in awe. From his hidden island sanctuary to his vintage American muscle cars, from luxurious yachts to a plane that carries his musical soul, it's as if only he could own such things. Not because he's a rock star, but because he is Brian Johnson. Luxury yachts, million-dollar supercars, and a hidden paradise mansion. That's what people see. But behind the glitz and glamour, Brian Johnson is also a shrewd investor, a man with a compassionate heart, and someone who once stood on the brink of losing everything due to an accident that seemed harmless. What really happened? Smart investments, a rocker with a business mind. When Brian isn't standing on stage, he's sitting behind a desk with a strategic gaze. Known for his thunderous voice, Brian invests with the calm and vision of a true CEO. He has invested in high-end real estate in Florida and the UK, many of which have doubled in value within a few years. But even more remarkable is his collection of rare vintage cars, accumulated not just out of passion but also because their value appreciates over time. His 1929 Bentley blower, once purchased for $200,000, is now valued at over $1.2 million. Additionally, Brian is the founder and main sponsor of the television series Cars That Rock, a show where he combines his love for vintage cars and music, creating an entertainment experience full of personality. The show has been commercially successful and helped build his image as a knowledgeable, fun-loving, and down-to-earth rock legend. Beyond that, he earns millions of dollars annually from AC/DC's music royalties, band merchandise, and especially from his autobiography The Lives of Brian, a bestseller that tells his life story with humor, depth, and unfiltered honesty. Few know that Brian once seriously considered buying shares in Newcastle United FC, the football club he has loved since childhood. Although the deal fell through due to conflicts of interest, it demonstrated that he always thinks beyond the stage, ready to invest in what he truly believes in. A charitable heart, when a rocker becomes a healer. Behind the powerful voice, Brian Johnson has a rare warmth not often seen in the entertainment industry. He doesn't engage in charity for praise. He does it because he genuinely wants to make a difference. In 2019, he made headlines by donating $335,000 to the All-Star Children Foundation in Florida, an organization that helps abused children. This was not a one-time act of generosity but part of a series of quiet contributions he has made over the years. Brian has also donated millions to cancer and cardiovascular research funds after losing a close bandmate to a terminal illness. "We've lost so many great people just because it was detected too late," he once said. "I can't change the past, but I can help save someone in the future." In his hometown of Sarasota, Brian funded the construction of a dedicated music therapy room for children suffering from depression and PTSD, helping them reconnect with emotions through music, the very thing that saved him from his own struggles. In an act largely unnoticed by the media, he also funded a campaign to plant over 100,000 trees in South America to offset the carbon footprint of his flights and tours. For Brian, Responsibility for the planet is as important as the lyrics he sings. The biggest crisis, when a warrior stands between light and darkness. Brian Johnson has lived a life beyond what a poor boy from Dunston could ever dream of. But in 2016, at the peak of his fame, an unexpected disaster struck, threatening to take away his most precious gift, his voice. It wasn't years of loud rock concerts or blinding stage lights that damaged Brian's hearing. It was a racing accident, his second great passion, that brought him to the edge of losing everything. Doctors warned, if he continued to sing, he could go completely deaf. It was the darkest moment of Brian's career. He was forced to withdraw from AC/DC's Rock or Bust tour, a heartbreaking decision. He once tearfully shared, "I could no longer hear the audience, just a faint echo in my head." The stage, where he once roared like thunder, had become a distant memory. Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses was invited to replace him, and fans were divided. Some supported the decision, calling it a temporary salvation. Others were furious, insisting that no one could replace Brian. But Brian did not surrender. He quietly embarked on a journey of treatment, refusing to let fate decide his life. With the help of cutting-edge hearing aid technology, a small but miraculous device, he gradually regained his ability to hear. During those months, he sat in his Sarasota home, looking over his infinity pool, whispering to himself, "If rock saved me once, I won't let it die within me." And then, in 2020, Brian returned, not just as a singer, but as a warrior. AC/DC released their new album Power Up, a bold declaration to the world. Rock has never died, and neither have I. Songs like Shot in the Dark echoed once again, carrying Brian's signature growl, raspier, deeper, but still full of life. Fans worldwide shed tears as they watched him stand on stage once more, proving that money can buy cars and mansions, but only sheer willpower can bring someone back from the darkness. Old scandals, the scars of the past, do not dim his light. Before the 2016 crisis, Brian was also caught in a personal scandal that once made headlines. In 1990, his divorce from his first wife, Carol, became tabloid fodder, with rumors claiming he had abandoned his family for fame. Brian was straightforward in his response. "We were defeated by a touring schedule of 250 days a year. No one abandoned anyone." Though painful, he never shied away from his past. That's what makes people admire him even more. He dares to live authentically, even with the imperfect parts of his story. He lost his voice, his family, and nearly his last chance to sing. But Brian Johnson never let the darkness consume him. So what gave him the strength to come back, stronger than ever? From a poor boy growing up amid coal smoke and freezing winds in Gateshead to a rock legend basking in the Florida sunshine in a mansion overlooking the ocean, Brian Johnson is living proof that no starting point is ever too low if you carry a big dream in your heart. He didn't just reach the peak of his career with AC/DC. He didn't just drive million-dollar cars or stand on the deck of a 50-meter yacht in the Caribbean. More importantly, he touched the hearts of millions through music, resilience, and a rare kind of kindness. Brian once lost his voice, the most precious asset of any singer, and stood at the edge between light and darkness. But he did not surrender. He came back, stronger, deeper, and more determined. He is not just the man who kept the flame of rock alive, but also the one who ignited hope in anyone who ever thought it was too late. And that is a legacy no amount of money can buy. The legacy of living with purpose. For those of us who have crossed the age of 50, Brian's journey is a gentle yet powerful reminder. Life is a long journey. You always have the right to write the next chapter. No matter how imperfect the beginning, no matter how many times you've fallen, you can still stand up and move forward, with dreams, with effort, and with a heart that knows how to give. And if there is one message that Brian Johnson leaves behind, it is this: live big, sing loud, and never let the past stop you from reaching for the future.